The autumn wind whistled through broken fence posts as Abigail Reynolds stood at the edge of the overgrown apple orchard, watching the auction company staff hammer weathered signs into the hard ground. Each stake seemed to puncture more than just soil. They pierced through the dreams and hopes of whoever had once called this place home. Meadowbrook Farm had been abandoned for nearly 3 years now, the once thriving 120-acre property with its historic farmhouse, red barn, and sprawling orchards had fallen into disrepair after the previous owners foreclosed. Abigail had driven past it countless times during her daily commute to Rosie's Diner, where she worked double shifts, always wondering about its story. "Mom, are we really going to try to buy a whole farm?" asked 10-year-old Emily, approaching quietly from behind, her voice sounding small against the vast neglected landscape. The question hanging in the crisp air like the apples that had fallen and rotted on the ground. Abigail tucked a strand of her chestnut hair behind her ear and put her arm around her daughter's shoulders. Unable to find the right words, her son Jason, 14, joined them, his expression a mixture of skepticism and barely concealed excitement. "I made hot chocolate," Jason said, offering them each a thermos cup, a simple gesture trying to normalize what was, by any measure, an outlandish plan. "Ms. Parker from the bank called again," he continued after a moment. "She says they're still processing your loan application, but it doesn't look promising. She mentioned your credit score." Abigail nodded, her throat tight. 6 years as a single mother after her husband Michael's sudden death had left her financially vulnerable. Between medical bills, the cost of raising two children, and her modest income as a waitress, her credit had taken hit after hit. The $35,000 she had managed to save from Michael's life insurance was all she had left to build a new future. "We've looked at 12 properties," Abigail said, her eyes scanning the dilapidated farmhouse. "This is the only one remotely within our reach. And even then, the auctioneer expects the starting bid to be around $85,000. A testament to how far the once grand property had fallen. The bank had valued it at nearly $400,000 in better days. But the remote location, years of neglect, and the current economic downturn in rural Clearwater County had made it a liability rather than an asset." "But what if we don't get it?" Emily asked, leaning into her mother's side. "Then we keep renting the apartment and saving," Abigail replied, trying to keep the disappointment from her voice. "But this place—" She didn't finish the thought. This place had sparked something in her the moment she saw the listing. Despite the peeling paint, sagging porch, and fields choked with weeds, Abigail had felt an inexplicable connection. Perhaps it was the apple orchard that, despite years of neglect, still produced fruit, or maybe it was the determined wildflowers that had pushed through the cracks in the old stone walkway, refusing to surrender to abandonment, whatever it was. Meadowbrook Farm represented more than just affordable housing to Abigail. It represented possibility, the chance to give her children space to grow, to perhaps generate income beyond her waitressing job, to put down roots after years of feeling adrift. The farmhouse itself seemed to sag under the weight of secrets and neglect, its once bright white paint now gray and peeling, repairs postponed until the house appeared to be actively surrendering to time and gravity. The barn's roof had partially collapsed on one side, and the greenhouse was more frame than glass. Yet despite all this, there was something compelling about the property, something that whispered of resilience. Word of Abigail's interest in the farm had spread through Oak Ridge quickly. In a town of just over 5,000 people, news traveled fast, especially when it involved a widow with two kids attempting something as audacious as buying a farm. "Heard Sterling Development is sending representatives to the auction," said Rosie, Abigail's boss at the diner, who had stopped by with a basket of muffins. "They've been buying up all the foreclosed rural properties within 50 miles, tearing down the old buildings and putting up those cookie-cutter suburban homes. They call it revitalization, but it's more like erasing history." Abigail clenched her jaw. The thought of bulldozers tearing through the heritage apple orchard or leveling the fieldstone walls that had stood for over a century made her stomach turn. "We'll be at the auction tomorrow," Rosie added, patting Abigail on the shoulder. "Most of the diner staff will. Not that any of us can afford to bid, but, well, We want to be there for you." That night, as Emily and Jason slept in their small shared bedroom in the apartment, Abigail sat at the kitchen table with her laptop. Spreadsheets and loan rejection letters spread before her. She traced her finger over the aerial view of Meadowbrook Farm, trying to imagine how she would manage such a property even if, by some miracle, she won the bid. The farm would need extensive repairs. The orchard would need pruning and care. The fields would need to be cleared and planted. And all of this would have to happen while she continued working at the diner to keep food on the table and pay the property taxes. "Maybe this is crazy," she whispered to the empty kitchen. "Dad would have thought it was a great idea," came Jason's voice, startling her. Her son leaned against the doorframe, his lanky frame reminding her more of Michael with each passing day. "Your father was always the dreamer between us," she said, a sad smile forming. "I was the practical one." "Maybe it's time for you to dream a little," Jason replied, sitting across from her. "You've been taking care of us, working double shifts, never complaining. Don't we deserve a chance at something different, something better?" His words struck a chord. For 6 years, Abigail had been in survival mode, focused on keeping her small family safe, fed, and together. The idea of taking a risk, of reaching for something more, seemed almost foreign now. "The orchard alone could be something," Jason continued, pointing to the aerial view on her laptop. "Mr. Hoffman at school says heritage apple varieties are making a comeback. People in the city pay premium prices for them." Abigail studied her son's earnest face, seeing a maturity that both impressed and saddened her. 14-year-olds shouldn't have to worry about agricultural market trends or their mother's financial struggles. "When did you get so grown up?" she asked softly. Jason shrugged. "Around the same time you started working 60-hour weeks." The statement wasn't accusatory, just matter of fact, but it still pierced Abigail's heart. Her children had been forced to grow up too quickly after Michael's death. Perhaps this farm, this crazy, improbable dream, could give them back some of the childhood they deserved. As dawn broke on auction day, Abigail stood in the small bathroom of their apartment, staring at her reflection in the mirror. Her hands trembled slightly as she applied mascara, a rare concession to vanity on a day when she needed every ounce of confidence she could muster. "You can do this," she told her reflection. "The worst that happens is you don't get the farm, and life continues as before." But as she said the words, she realized how much she had invested emotionally in the idea of Meadowbrook becoming their home. The thought of returning to their cramped apartment after today, of telling Emily and Jason that their fresh start would have to wait, made her chest tighten. The drive to the auction site was quiet. Jason stared out the window, his expression unreadable. Emily clutched a small, smooth stone, her lucky charm so tightly that her knuckles were white, when they arrived. Abigail was surprised by the number of vehicles already parked along the dirt road leading to the farmhouse. The sight of so many people triggered a wave of anxiety. More interest meant higher bids, and higher bids meant... She stopped herself, one step at a time. The crowd gathered on the patchy lawn in front of the farmhouse was a mix of locals in worn jeans and work boots, curious neighbors, and a small cluster of men in business casual attire who stood slightly apart, checking their phones and speaking quietly into Bluetooth earpieces. Rosie waved from near the registration table, where Abigail needed to provide identification and proof of funds to receive a bidder's number. "Your whole cheering section is here," Rosie said, gesturing to where several of the diner regulars stood. "Old Mr. Simmons even put $20 into the pot, said to add it to your bid." She winked. "Every little bit helps." "Right." As Abigail completed the registration process, a sleek black SUV pulled up, and two more men in crisp button-downs emerged, both carrying tablets with the Sterling Development logo clearly visible. They surveyed the property with calculating eyes, making notes and occasionally taking photos of the structural defects in the buildings. "That's Alexander Chen," Rosie whispered, nodding toward the older of the two men. "Regional Director for Sterling. If he's here personally, they're serious about this property." Abigail's heart sank. How could she possibly compete with a development company? She looked down at her bidder's card number 17 and wondered if she was making a terrible mistake. At precisely 10:00 a.m., the auctioneer, a portly man with a booming voice, called everyone to attention. The crowd quieted as he outlined the terms of the sale: cash or pre-approved financing, 10% deposit due immediately, closing within 30 days, and the property sold as is, with no warranties expressed or implied. Ladies and gentlemen, we're here today for the public auction of the property known as Meadowbrook Farm, 120 acres with farmhouse, barn, outbuildings, and established orchard. Due to foreclosure proceedings, bidding will start at $85,000. Abigail closed her eyes briefly, centering herself. This was it. Her savings of $35,000 wouldn't be enough for the full purchase, but combined with the small personal loan she had secured from Oak Ridge Credit Union, she could bid up to $110,000. Beyond that, she had no options. $85,000. Do I have $85,000? Abigail raised her bidder's card, her hands steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her. She was aware of Jason and Emily standing close on either side of her, their presence both a comfort and a reminder of what was at stake. I have $85,000 from bidder number 17. Do I hear $90,000? Almost immediately, Alexander Chen from Sterling raised his card. $90,000. $90,000 from bidder number 23. Do I hear $95,000? Abigail raised her card again. The next few minutes passed in a blur of rising numbers. $95,000, $100, $1,000, $105, $1. Each time Abigail bid, Chen countered smoothly, without hesitation or emotion, as if they were bidding on a used car rather than what Abigail hoped would be her family's future. At $110,000, Abigail's stomach clenched. She was at her absolute limit. When Chen bid $115,000, she kept her card lowered, her chest tight with disappointment. $115,000 from bidder number 23, going once. Emily looked up at her, eyes welling with tears. I'm sorry, sweetheart, Abigail whispered. We can't go any higher. Going twice. The auctioneer's gavel hovered in the air. Abigail felt a peculiar numbness spreading through her body, a defense mechanism against the crushing disappointment. $120,000. The voice came from behind them, clear and firm. The crowd turned to see who had spoken. A woman in her 60s with silver hair and practical clothes raised her bidder's card number 8. Alexander Chen looked momentarily surprised before recovering and raising his own card. $125,000. $130,000. The silver-haired woman countered without hesitation. A murmur ran through the crowd. The property, in its current condition, wasn't worth much more than $100,000 according to most local assessments. The bidding was now entering territory that defied conventional economic sense. As Chen consulted briefly with his colleague, Abigail studied the woman who had entered the bidding so unexpectedly. There was something familiar about her, though Abigail couldn't place where she might have seen her before. $135,000, Chen said, his voice slightly less confident than before. $150,000, the woman responded immediately. A collective gasp rose from the crowd. Chen spoke urgently into his Bluetooth earpiece, his expression growing increasingly frustrated. Finally, he shook his head at the auctioneer. $150,000 going once, going twice. The auctioneer scanned the crowd for any additional bids. Finding none, he brought down his gavel with a sharp crack. Sold to bidder number 8 for $150,000. The tension drained from Abigail's body, leaving behind a hollow ache. She had allowed herself to hope, to dream, and now she needed to face reality again. She put on a brave smile for her children. We'll find something else, she promised, though the words felt empty even to her own ears. As the crowd began to disperse, Abigail gathered her courage to approach the woman who had won the auction. It seemed only right to congratulate her and perhaps learn a little about her plans for the property that had, however briefly, occupied such a significant place in Abigail's dreams. Excuse me, Abigail said as she approached. I just wanted to say congratulations on your purchase. The silver-haired woman turned, studying Abigail with bright, intelligent eyes. Thank you. You're Abigail Reynolds. Aren't you waitress at Rosie's Diner? 2 children. Interested in heritage apple cultivation? Abigail blinked in surprise. How do you know all that? We're small town, the woman replied with a slight smile. And I make it a point to know who's interested in properties I'm considering. I'm Victoria Hargrove. She extended her hand. Abigail shook it, finding the grip firm and direct. It's a beautiful property, or it could be. With some work, it certainly could, Victoria agreed, looking past Abigail to where Jason and Emily stood, watching them curiously. Those are your children. Yes, Jason and Emily, Abigail said, gesturing for them to join her. Victoria nodded thoughtfully. Tell me, Miss Reynolds, why were you interested in Meadowbrook Farm? It's hardly an obvious choice for a single mother working at a diner. The question might have seemed intrusive from someone else, but Victoria's tone held genuine curiosity rather than judgment. It's hard to explain, Abigail admitted. From the first time I saw it, I felt a connection. The orchard especially, my grandfather was an orchardist in Michigan, and some of my happiest childhood memories are of helping him during harvest season. She hesitated before adding, and honestly, it was one of the few properties remotely within my price range. At least, I thought it was. Victoria's expression softened slightly. And what would you have done with 120 acres and a farm that needs significant rehabilitation? We had planned, Jason interjected. Stepping forward, Mom's researched heritage apple varieties that would grow well here. We were going to restore the orchard first, then convert part of the barn into a small cidery, eventually. Maybe open a farm stand or pick your own operation. Abigail glanced at her son in surprise. They had discussed these possibilities, but she hadn't realized how much thought he had put into them. Ambitious, Victoria commented, but without sarcasm. And the farmhouse, it needs substantial work. We would have lived in the small caretaker's cottage while fixing up the main house room by room. Emily piped up. I was going to have the bedroom with the window seat. Victoria smiled at the girl's specificity. That's the best bedroom in the house. Good choice. As Alexander Chen from Sterling Development approached, clearly intending to speak with Victoria, she held up a hand to forestall him. Mr. Chen, I'll be with you shortly. Chen retreated, looking somewhat annoyed at being dismissed. Victoria turned back to Abigail. I have a proposition for you. Ms. Reynolds, would you and your children join me for lunch at the diner? I'd like to discuss something with you. Confused but intrigued, Abigail nodded. Of course, though I should warn you I'm not scheduled to work today, so the service might be a bit slower than usual. Victoria chuckled. I think we'll manage. As they walked toward their respective vehicles, Jason leaned close to his mother. What do you think she wants? I have no idea, Abigail admitted, but I guess we're about to find out. The drive back to town was filled with speculation. Emily wondered if Victoria might want to hire them as caretakers for the property. Jason theorized that perhaps she wanted advice about the orchard. Given Abigail's family background, Abigail herself tried to keep her expectations firmly in check, whatever Victoria Hargrove wanted to discuss. It wouldn't change the fundamental reality Meadowbrook Farm would not be their home when they arrived at Rosie's Diner. Victoria was already seated in a corner booth, a manila folder and legal pad on the table before her. She looked up as they approached, gesturing for them to join her. I took the liberty of ordering coffee, she said, and chocolate milk for Emily. Rosie mentioned it's your favorite. Emily's eyes widened at this personalized attention from a stranger. Thank you. Once they were settled, Victoria didn't waste time on small talk. I'll be direct. Missouri Reynolds. I buy distressed rural properties throughout this region. Normally, I renovate the houses, restore the land to productivity, and either sell them to carefully selected buyers or establish them as working educational farms. You outbid Sterling, Abigail observed. They're not used to losing. From what I hear, Victoria's expression hardened slightly. Sterling Development represents everything wrong with rural land management. They purchase properties like Meadowbrook, bulldoze everything of historical and agricultural value, and replace them with generic housing developments that destroy the character of rural communities. Her passion was evident, reminding Abigail of her own grandfather's fierce protection of his orchard against encroaching development decades ago. "So you're a preservationist?" Abigail asked. "In a sense," Victoria replied. "Not the type who wants to freeze everything in amber. I believe in adaptive reuse, in helping rural properties remain economically viable while preserving their essential character." She paused. "Which brings me to why I wanted to speak with you." She opened the manila folder and slid a document across the table. "This is a proposal for a rather unconventional arrangement regarding Meadowbrook Farm. I'd like you to read it carefully." Abigail stared at the document Victoria had placed before her, a mixture of confusion and wariness taking hold. Her fingers trembled slightly as she reached for it, unsure what to expect. This was turning into the strangest day of her life, first losing the auction for what she'd hoped would be her family's home, and now sitting across from the mysterious winner who seemed to know an unusual amount about her. "Take your time," Victoria said, signaling to the waitress for more coffee. The proposal was typed on a formal letterhead, Heritage Farm Preservation Trust, and as Abigail began reading, her confusion only deepened. Victoria Hargrove wasn't simply proposing to sell her the farm, she was offering a partnership, a mentorship, and what amounted to a complete career change all at once. Jason leaned against his mother's shoulder. Reading along silently, Emily fidgeted with her straw wrapper, too young to understand the legal language but sensing the importance of the moment nonetheless. "I don't understand," Abigail finally said, looking up from the document. "You want me to live at Meadowbrook and manage the restoration of the orchard as your employee?" Victoria shook her head. "Not as an employee, as a partner. My trust would retain ownership of the land itself. But you would have a 99-year lease on the property with an option to purchase after 5 years. You would own the business you create there outright. The trust would provide initial capital for restoration, equipment, and materials." "Why me?" Abigail asked bluntly. "You don't know me. I'm a waitress with no formal agricultural training, a single mother with barely enough savings to make the minimum bid on a foreclosed property." Victoria's expression softened. "Sometimes the right experience doesn't come with degrees or certifications. Miss Reynolds, you grew up working in your grandfather's orchard. You've spent 6 years demonstrating remarkable resilience and resourcefulness as a single parent. Your research into heritage apple varieties shows initiative and genuine passion." She took a sip of her coffee before continuing. "More importantly, you see Meadowbrook for what it could be, not just what it is now. That vision is rarer than you might think." Abigail glanced at her children, noting Jason's barely contained excitement and Emily's wide-eyed wonder. "This seems too good to be true," she said cautiously. "What's the catch?" Victoria smiled slightly. "Direct. I appreciate that." She leaned forward. "Here's the catch. As you put it, the work will be intensive restoring that orchard, rehabilitating the buildings, establishing a viable business. It's not for the faint of heart. You'll work harder than you ever have at the diner, with no guaranteed outcome." "I'm not afraid of hard work," Abigail replied. "I know," Victoria said simply. "That's why we're having this conversation." Before Abigail could respond, the diner's door swung open, and Alexander Chen from Sterling Development entered, scanning the room until his gaze landed on their table. His expression tightened as he approached. "Ms. Hargrove," he said without acknowledging the others, "I'd like to discuss the Meadowbrook property. Sterling is prepared to make you a generous offer, $200,000 cash. Immediate closing." Victoria didn't even look up. "The property is not for sale, Mr. Chen, as I believe I made clear at the auction." Chen's professional demeanor slipped slightly. "You're making a mistake. That property is strategically located for our Meadow Vista Estates development. The projected return on—" "Mr. Chen," Victoria interrupted, finally looking at him. "I'm having lunch and a private business discussion. Your offer is declined. The amount is irrelevant." The developer's face flushed. "You can't seriously intend to restore that derelict property. The rehabilitation costs alone would be none of your concern," Victoria finished for him. "Good day, Mr. Chen." For a moment, it seemed Chen might argue further, But something in Victoria's steady gaze made him reconsider. With a tight nod, he turned and left, the bell above the diner door jangling with his abrupt exit. "He'll be back," Victoria commented, returning her attention to Abigail. "Sterling has purchased 6 properties in this county in the past year. They're piecing together land for a massive development luxury homes. Boutique hotel, golf course, Meadowbrook's water rights and location make it particularly valuable to them." Abigail looked down at the proposal again. "And stopping them is part of why you're doing this." "One of many reasons," Victoria acknowledged, "but not the primary one. My interest is in preserving agricultural heritage and creating sustainable rural businesses. Countering irresponsible development is a happy side effect." The waitress arrived with their lunch club sandwiches for the adults, grilled cheese for Emily, and a burger for Jason. As they ate, Victoria outlined more details of her proposal. The trust would provide $175,000 for restoration and business development over 3 years. Abigail would need to submit quarterly reports and adhere to certain preservation and sustainability guidelines, but she would retain creative control over the business direction as long as it centered on the orchard's heritage varieties. "The cottage is habitable now," Victoria added. "Victoria, it needs cosmetic work, but the systems are sound. You could move in within 2 weeks." Jason could barely contain himself. "Mom, this is exactly what we wanted. It's perfect." "Slow down," Abigail cautioned, though she felt the same excitement bubbling up inside her. "There's a lot to consider." "Such as," Victoria prompted. "For starters, my job, I can't just quit the diner and hope the orchard produces income immediately. The funding includes a modest living stipend for the first year," Victoria pointed out. "After that, the business should begin generating revenue, especially if you implement the farm-to-table component with local restaurants." Abigail tapped the paper with her finger. "This mentions converting the old dairy barn into an event space. That's a massive undertaking." "Phased over 3 years," Victoria countered, "starting with the cidery in the small barn, then farm stand, then event space as the business grows." She studied Abigail's expression. "You're looking for problems, Miss Hannah Reynolds. That's not necessarily bad. It shows you're taking this seriously. But sometimes an opportunity comes along that defies conventional caution." Emily, who had been quiet until now, looked up from her grilled cheese. "Mom, remember what Dad always said, life's biggest regrets are the chances we don't take." Abigail felt her breath catch. Michael had indeed said that often, usually before embarking on one of his adventurous plans. It was both comforting and painful to hear his words from their daughter's mouth. "Your husband sounds like a wise man," Victoria observed gently. "He was," Abigail said softly. "He would have loved Meadowbrook." She squared her shoulders. "I need to think about this. It's not just my decision, it affects all of us." "Of course," Victoria said, sliding a business card across the table. "Take the weekend. Look over the proposal carefully. Visit the property again. I've instructed the caretaker to give you full access. Call me on Monday with your decision." As Victoria prepared to leave, she hesitated. "One more thing, Miss Reynolds. While the business components of this arrangement are important, they're not why I chose you for this opportunity." "Why did you, then?" Abigail asked. "Because when you looked at that rundown farm, you didn't see problems, you saw possibilities. That kind of vision can't be taught." With that, Victoria left, the bell above the door chiming softly behind her. The weekend passed in a blur of research, discussions, and 2 more visits to Meadowbrook Farm. Abigail brought a contractor friend to assess the cottage and main house. She called the Agricultural Extension Office to discuss the orchard's potential. She created spreadsheets, budgets, and business projections until her eyes burned from staring at her laptop screen. On their Sunday visit, as Jason and Emily explored the property, Abigail found herself drawn to the main farmhouse again, despite its dilapidated condition. There was something compelling about the old structure, hand-hewn beams, wide plank floors worn smooth by generations of footsteps, built-in cabinets crafted by someone who clearly took pride in their work, in what had once been the living room. Abigail noticed something odd a slight difference in the wood pattern of the floorboards near the massive stone fireplace. Kneeling. She ran her fingers along the seam where the patterns changed. "Find something interesting," came a voice from the doorway. It was Walter Freeman, the caretaker Victoria had mentioned. "Maybe," Abigail said, looking up. "The floor pattern changes here. Was there a repair at some point?" Walter, a weathered man in his 70s, crossed the room and knelt beside her with surprising agility. "Good eye." "That's not a repair, though it's a hidden compartment." "A what?" Walter grinned, pressing firmly on one edge of the irregular floorboard. To Abigail's astonishment, the opposite edge rose slightly. Walter gripped it and lifted, revealing a shallow space beneath. "Empty now," he said. "But according to local legend, old Thomas Bedford, who built this place back in 1886, used to hide valuables here during uncertain times. Man distrusted banks. Apparently, with good reason, he kept his money here through the panic of 1893 while 3 local banks failed." Abigail peered into the empty space, oddly moved by this connection to the farm's original owner. "That's fascinating. This whole property is full of history like that," Walter said, replacing the floorboard. "Shame to see it sitting empty so long. Even bigger shame if those developers got hold of it." He fixed Abigail with a knowing look. "Miss Hargrove mentioned you might be taking it on. That true?" "I'm still deciding," Abigail admitted. Walter nodded. "Well, for what it's worth. This old place has been waiting for someone who sees its value, not just the land or buildings, but its story. History like this deserves a future. Don't you think?" His words stayed with Abigail as they finished touring the property. On the drive home, Emily fell asleep in the back seat, while Jason stared thoughtfully out the window at the passing landscape. "You're going to say yes, aren't you?" he asked suddenly. Abigail glanced at him. "What makes you think that?" "The way you look at the place, same way you used to look at those old photos of Grandpa's orchard. Like you're seeing something that isn't quite there yet, but could be." Abigail smiled. When had her son become so perceptive? "It's a huge risk, Jason. If it doesn't work out, then we try something else," he interrupted. "But at least we tried." That's what Dad would say. "Your father didn't have to worry about providing stability for 2 children," Abigail pointed out gently. "We've had stability, Mom," Jason replied. "What we haven't had is, I don't know, possibility, adventure, something that's ours, not just something we're getting by in." His words echoed in Abigail's mind as she lay awake that night, weighing options, calculating risks, and trying to quiet the persistent voice of doubt that had been her companion since Michael's death. By morning, she had made her decision. Monday dawned clear and crisp, the kind of autumn day that showcased Clearwater County's rolling hills and vibrant foliage to perfection. Abigail dropped the children at school with promises to update them immediately after her meeting with Victoria, then drove to the address on the business card, a converted mill building on the edge of town that housed the offices of the Heritage Farm Preservation Trust. Victoria was waiting in a simply furnished office overlooking the mill pond. Large maps covered one wall, with colored pins marking various properties throughout the region. Architectural drawings and farm plans were tacked to another wall. It wasn't what Abigail had expected from someone wealthy enough to outbid a development company without hesitation. "Have you made your decision, Miss Reynolds?" Victoria asked after they had exchanged greetings. "I have," Abigail replied, taking a deep breath. "I accept your proposal, with one condition." Victoria raised an eyebrow. "Which is, I want a clear path to ownership, not just a lease with an option. If I commit 5 years to restoring Meadowbrook and establishing a successful business there, I want the opportunity to purchase the property at a fair market value, with credit for the improvements I've made." Victoria studied her for a moment. "You're planning for the long term. I respect that." She nodded. "I'll have the agreement amended. Anything else?" "Yes," Abigail said. "I'd like to understand why you're really doing this. Not the general mission of your trust, but why you personally have dedicated yourself to saving these old farms. What's your connection to all this?" A shadow passed over Victoria's face. She rose and walked to the window, looking out at the mill pond for several moments before responding. I grew up on a farm much like Meadowbrook, she finally said. 5 generations of Hargroves had worked that land. I was an only child, expected to be the 6th generation. She turned back to Abigail. But I had other ideas. I left at 18 for college, then law school, then a corporate career that took me far from home. My parents continued running the farm, adapting as best they could to changing markets and economic pressures. When my father died, my mother struggled to keep it going alone. She asked me to come home, to help, to consider taking over. Victoria's voice remained steady, but Abigail could hear the pain beneath the controlled exterior. I was too busy with my career, too important in my own mind to step away. 3 years later, the farm was foreclosed on. A development company much like Sterling purchased it at auction. They bulldozed the house I grew up in, the barn my great-grandfather built, the orchard where I climbed trees as a child. By the time I returned home, there was nothing left but street signs named after farm features that no longer existed. Orchard Lane, Hargrove Ridge Drive. She sat back down, her composure restored. I was too late to save my family's heritage, but not too late to help preserve others. I made a great deal of money in corporate law, Ms. Reynolds. Now I use that money to right what I see as a profound wrong, the systematic erasure of rural agricultural heritage in the name of progress that serves very few at the expense of many. Abigail nodded, understanding now the passion that drove the older woman. Thank you for telling me. The past can't be changed, Victoria said, but the future is still unwritten. Meadowbrook Farm has stood empty for 3 years. In another 3, it could be a thriving business and a home for your family. That transformation, that's what drives me now. By the time Abigail left Victoria's office, the amended agreement in hand, she felt a strange mixture of excitement and terror. She had just committed to a complete life change, exchanging the security of her waitressing job for the uncertain prospects of rehabilitating a historical farm. As she drove to the school to pick up her children and share the news, doubt began to creep in again. Was she being reckless, naive? Was she risking her children's stability on a romantic notion? Jason and Emily's excitement when she told them the news temporarily pushed those worries aside. Their enthusiasm was contagious. Jason's immediate dive into planning, researching apple varieties on his phone, Emily drawing pictures of her future bedroom, both touching and energizing. That evening, as Abigail began the monumental task of organizing their move, a knock came at the apartment door. It was Rosie from the diner, bearing a casserole and a concerned expression. Word's spreading about your new venture, Rosie said as Abigail invited her in. Thought you might need dinner. What with all the planning you must be doing? Thank you, Abigail said, genuinely grateful. There's so much to organize. I gave my notice at the diner today. Rosie nodded, setting the casserole on the counter. That's actually why I'm here. The staff took up a collection. She handed Abigail an envelope. It's not much, but everyone wanted to contribute something to help you get started. Abigail opened the envelope to find several $100s in cash and a card signed by everyone at the diner. She blinked back sudden tears. Rosie, this is too generous. Nonsense, Rosie replied briskly, though her own eyes looked suspiciously moist. You're taking on something important, not just for yourself, but for the whole county. That development company would have changed everything about this area, and not for the better. She looked around the small apartment. Need help packing? The offer of help opened a floodgate over the next week, as news of Abigail's partnership with the Heritage Trust spread through Oak Ridge. People appeared at the apartment offering assistance, advice, and encouragement. Old Mr. Simmons, who had farmed all his life before retiring, brought boxes of books on orchard management. The high school agriculture teacher offered to bring students to help clear overgrown areas of the property as a class project. 3 local carpenters volunteered a weekend to help make the cottage properly habitable before winter set in. I don't understand, Abigail said to Rosie as they sorted through kitchen items, deciding what to pack first. Why is everyone being so helpful? I barely know some of these people. Rosie looked up from wrapping plates and newspaper. You're doing something that gives people hope. Abigail, This county has been watching family farms disappear one by one for years, replaced by developments that change the character of the place we love. You're pushing back against that tide, saying this piece of our heritage matters. That resonates with folks. 2 weeks after accepting Victoria's proposal, Abigail stood in the small caretaker's cottage at Meadowbrook Farm, surrounded by boxes and the mismatched furniture they had brought from the apartment. The place was modest, 2 bedrooms, a living area, kitchen, and bathroom, but the volunteer carpenters had worked wonders. Walls had been repaired and painted, leaky plumbing fixed, new energy-efficient windows installed. It was far from luxurious, but it was clean, sound, and now somehow theirs. Through the kitchen window, Abigail could see Jason in the nearest section of the orchard, carefully pruning dead branches under Walter Freeman's guidance. Emily was in what had once been a kitchen garden, now overgrown but clearly salvageable, marking out rows with string and stakes for spring planting. A sense of both peace and purpose settled over Abigail. There would be challenges ahead, enormous ones, but for the first time in years, she was moving towards something rather than simply surviving. The sound of tires on gravel drew her attention. Victoria's car was coming up the drive, unusual since they had just met 2 days ago to finalize paperwork. Curious, Abigail stepped onto the small porch as Victoria parked and emerged with a large rolled document under her arm. "I hope I'm not interrupting your settling in," Victoria called in greeting. "Not at all," Abigail replied. "We're just getting organized. Would you like coffee? I managed to find the coffee maker in one of these boxes." "Perhaps later," Victoria said, approaching the porch. "I've brought something I thought might interest you." She extended the rolled document. Abigail accepted the roll with surprised delight. "What is it?" "The original plans for the farm, dated 1886. I found them in the county archives." Abigail carefully unfurled the edge, revealing detailed hand-drawn plans of the main house, barn, and outbuildings. "These will be invaluable for the restoration." "Thank you." "Look at the section on the main house," Victoria suggested. "Page 3. I believe." Abigail gently separated the pages until she found the one Victoria indicated detailed floor plans of the farmhouse. Her eyes widened as she spotted what Victoria must have noticed. Clearly marked in the foundation plans was a large rectangular space labeled "Storage Vault." "Is this what I think it is?" Abigail asked, her pulse quickening. Victoria smiled. "According to the county historian, Thomas Bedford installed a proper safe in the cellar when he built the house. Walter mentioned you found the small floor compartment, but this is something more substantial. The historian believes it may never have been discovered during later renovations, as it was concealed behind a false wall in the cellar." "A hidden safe," Abigail breathed. Well, that's straight out of a treasure hunt novel." "Indeed," Victoria agreed. "And since you're now the caretaker of the property, with full rights to any historical artifacts discovered during restoration, I thought you might want to investigate the possibility of a hidden safe from the 1880s, potentially undiscovered for generations." Sent Abigail's mind racing with questions. What might be inside? Documents, coins, family heirlooms, or perhaps nothing at all, empty, long ago, or never used in the first place. Either way, it was a tangible connection to the farm's origins, a mystery waiting to be solved. "Mom!" Emily called, racing toward the house with the boundless energy of a 10-year-old. "Walter says there's a secret trap door in the barn that goes to an underground room. Can we look at it? Please." Abigail laughed. "Apparently Meadowbrook has more secrets than we realized." "Old farms often do," Victoria said. "Each generation leaves its mark, sometimes hidden, waiting for someone who cares enough to discover it." She glanced at her watch. "I should let you get back to settling in. I just wanted to deliver those plans personally." As Victoria prepared to leave, Abigail impulsively reached out and touched her arm. "Thank you, not just for the plans, but for everything, for believing in me when I barely believed in myself." Victoria's customary reserve softened. "You remind me of myself at your age." Miss Reynolds, before I made the mistake of walking away from my roots, perhaps that's part of why I chose you for this project, a chance to see a different path taken. After Victoria departed, Abigail carefully re-rolled the plans and set them aside for proper examination later. Through the window, she could see Jason and Emily now huddled with Walter near the barn. Clearly excited about the prospect of hidden rooms and secret passages, the road ahead would be difficult. The orchard would need years of work before reaching full production. The buildings required extensive restoration. A business would need to be built from the ground up. But standing in this small cottage, watching her children embrace their new home with such enthusiasm, Abigail felt something she hadn't experienced since before Michael's death. The quiet confidence that came with finding exactly where you were meant to be. And somewhere beneath the floorboards of the old farmhouse, a century-old safe waited to be discovered. Perhaps empty, perhaps holding treasures, but certainly holding stories. Tomorrow they would begin searching for it. Tonight, they would unpack, make beds, and have their first dinner in their new home. Meadowbrook Farm had stood for generations, witnessing the ebb and flow of rural life, seasons of bounty and hardship, families coming and going. Now it would witness something new, resurrection not just of buildings and orchards, but of hope, purpose, and possibility. The morning sun filtered through the trees, casting dappled light across the old farmhouse as Abigail, Jason, and Emily stood in the damp cellar, examining the stone foundation wall. According to the original plans Victoria had provided, the hidden safe should be located behind a section of the east wall, concealed by what appeared on the drawings as a false stone panel. "It should be right here," Abigail said, running her hand along the rough stonework. Unlike the rest of the cellar walls, which were irregular fieldstone, this section featured more uniformly cut blocks. The question is how to access it. Walter Freeman, who had joined their treasure hunt with the enthusiasm of someone half his age, shone his flashlight along the seams between the stones. Thomas Bedford was known for his craftsmanship. If he built a hidden compartment, it wouldn't be obvious, but it wouldn't be impossible to access either. Jason crouched down, examining the floor where it met the wall. "Look at this," he said, pointing to what appeared to be slight wear marks in the dirt floor. "Something's been moved here repeatedly." Abigail knelt beside him, brushing away decades of dust from a flat stone near the base of the wall. As the dirt cleared, a small, almost imperceptible iron ring became visible, embedded in the stone. "Is that what I think it is?" Emily whispered, the flashlight beam reflecting in her wide eyes. "Only one way to find out," Abigail replied, grasping the ring and pulling gently. At first, nothing happened, the ring seeming fused to the stone by time and dampness. Jason joined his mother, adding his strength, and slowly the stone began to move, grating against its neighbors as it slid forward. Behind the stone was a small lever. Walter whistled low. "Ingenious. Simple mechanical trigger, probably connected to a counterweight system." "Should we pull it?" Abigail asked, looking to Walter for guidance. "That's what levers are for," he replied with a grin. Abigail gripped the rusted iron handle and pulled downward. For a moment, nothing happened. Then came a grinding sound from within the wall. Slowly, a section of the stonework about 3 feet square moved inward and then slid to the side, revealing a recessed cavity. And there it was, a cast iron safe, its once black surface now rusted and discolored, but still solid. The ornate Bedford nameplate clearly visible across its front. "It's real," Abigail breathed, almost unable to believe what they were seeing. "It's actually here." "Can we open it?" Emily asked, practically bouncing with excitement. Walter shone his flashlight on the old combination dial. "That's a champion model from the 1880s. Good craftsmanship, but the mechanism is likely seized after all these years. Might need a locksmith." "Wait," Jason said, studying the original house plans they had brought down with them. "Look at this notation in the margin." He pointed to faded handwriting, almost invisible in the corner of the blueprint. "It looks like numbers 1842-7. Abigail peered at the faint notation. "Could be the combination." "Worth a try," Walter said, "though don't get your hopes up." These old mechanisms can be temperamental even when regularly used, let alone after sitting untouched for who knows how long. Abigail knelt before the safe, wiping dust from the dial with her sleeve. The mechanism felt stiff but not completely frozen as she carefully turned it right to 18, left to 42, right to 7. At the final number, she tried the handle. Nothing happened. Maybe it's not the combination after all, Jason said, disappointment evident in his voice. Or maybe... Abigail tried again, this time turning the dial with more force at each number. When she reached the final position and pulled the handle, she was rewarded with a faint click, followed by the groan of long-dormant metal as the door reluctantly began to open. The hinges protested after their century of disuse, but the heavy door swung outward, revealing the safe's dark interior. Walter directed his flashlight inside, illuminating the contents. There was no pile of gold coins or glittering jewels, as Emily had secretly hoped. Instead, they found a stack of leather-bound ledgers, several bundles of yellowed papers tied with faded ribbon, a small wooden box, and a cloth sack that clinked when Walter carefully lifted it. Nothing of significant monetary value at first glance, Walter commented, but historically could be priceless. They carefully removed the items, bringing them upstairs to the kitchen table in the cottage where they could examine them properly. Abigail felt an odd sense of reverence as she laid out the artifacts from a different era. Tangible connections to the man who had built this farm and the family who had worked it for generations. The ledgers proved to be farm records spanning from 1886 to 1924, detailing crop yields, livestock records, expenses, and profits in meticulous handwriting. The bundles of papers included correspondence, deeds, and what appeared to be agricultural research. Thomas Bedford had apparently been experimenting with apple varieties, grafting techniques, and storage methods well ahead of his time. The cloth sack contained a small collection of gold coins, not a fortune, but certainly valuable both historically and monetarily. The wooden box, however, held what would prove to be the most significant find. "It's a journal," Abigail said softly as she opened the ornately carved box to reveal a leather-bound book with T. Bedford embossed on the cover. "And look at this!" Tucked inside the journal was an envelope addressed simply, "To the future steward of Meadowbrook." With trembling fingers, Abigail opened the unsealed envelope and removed a single sheet of paper, the handwriting strong and clear despite its age. "To whoever finds this," she read aloud, "if you are reading these words, you have discovered the legacy of Meadowbrook Farm and, I hope, have taken up its stewardship. I established this farm in 1886 with the belief that this land, properly tended, could support generations to come. In this safe, you will find the financial history of our endeavors, research that may prove valuable to future orchardists, and a modest emergency fund that has helped our family weather several economic storms. The true wealth of Meadowbrook, however, lies not in gold, but in the land itself, specifically in the North Orchard, where I have cultivated what I believe to be unique apple varieties that combine the best qualities of durability, flavor, and disease resistance. It is my hope that whoever discovers this vault values not just its monetary contents, but the agricultural heritage it represents. May Meadowbrook continue to bear fruit for generations yet unborn, with respect and optimism for the future. Thomas Bedford, 1924. A profound silence fell over the kitchen as Abigail finished reading. The letter, written nearly a century ago, seemed to speak directly to their present circumstances. As if Thomas Bedford had somehow known his farm would one day need resurrection and had left behind not just his possessions, but his vision. "The North Orchard," Jason said finally. "That's the most overgrown section, the one we haven't even properly surveyed yet." "Unique apple varieties," Abigail repeated, her mind racing with possibilities. "If he developed proprietary varieties that have survived all these years." Walter nodded, understanding the implications immediately. Heritage apple varieties are experiencing a renaissance. Cideries, gourmet food companies, farm-to-table restaurants, they're all searching for unique historical apples with character you can't find in commercial varieties. "We need to examine that orchard immediately," Abigail said. Energized by this unexpected discovery, if Thomas Bedford's experimental trees are still alive, it could completely change our restoration priorities and potentially provide a unique market advantage. The North Orchard proved to be more challenging to access than anticipated. Decades of neglect had allowed wild growth to nearly reclaim the land, with volunteer saplings, brambles, and vines creating a nearly impenetrable thicket around and between what had once been orderly rows of apple trees. Undeterred, Abigail organized a weekend clearing expedition. Word of the hidden safe and Thomas Bedford's letter spread quickly through Oak Ridge, and what had been planned as a small family project unexpectedly transformed into a community event. Saturday morning found 20 volunteers arriving at Meadowbrook Farm with chainsaws, brush cutters, rakes, and determination. "Never seen this much interest in clearing brush before," Walter commented as he helped organize the volunteers into teams. "Amazing what a 100-year-old mystery will do," one of the local carpenters replied with a chuckle. Among the volunteers was Dr. Catherine Winters, a pomologist from the State University's Agricultural Extension Office, who had heard about the possibility of undocumented heritage apple varieties and driven 2 hours to investigate. If these trees have indeed survived without human intervention for decades, they could possess remarkable genetic resilience. Dr. Winters explained as she followed Abigail through the gradually clearing paths. That alone would make them valuable for breeding programs, not to mention any unique flavor profiles they might offer. By Sunday afternoon, the transformation was remarkable. What had appeared to be hopeless overgrowth now revealed itself as approximately 50 ancient apple trees gnarled, unpruned, and struggling beneath vines, but unquestionably alive among them. Dr. Winters identified 7 trees that didn't match any known varieties in her extensive catalog. These could absolutely be Thomas Bedford's experimental varieties, she confirmed, carefully collecting leaf samples for DNA analysis. They've survived drought, disease, and decades of neglect. That's exceptional resilience. As the volunteers departed, tired but satisfied with their weekend's work, Abigail found herself standing alone in the center of the newly revealed orchard. The ancient trees, now freed from their strangling competitors, seemed to stand taller, their twisted branches reaching toward the late afternoon sunlight with a kind of dignified perseverance that moved her unexpectedly. These trees had outlived their planter, witnessed the passage of generations, survived abandonment, and endured. Now they were being given a second chance, just as she was. The parallel wasn't lost on Abigail. "Mom," Jason's voice broke into her reflections. "Dr. Winters wants to know if she can come back next weekend with a grafting team. She says if these are truly unique varieties, we should start propagating them immediately to ensure they're preserved." The following weeks passed in a whirlwind of activity as word of the Meadowbrook discovery spread. Interest in the farm grew. Dr. Winters confirmed that at least 5 of the mysterious trees were indeed undocumented varieties. In preliminary taste tests of the few apples they bore, that autumn revealed exceptional qualities, one with intense aromatics reminiscent of tropical fruit, another with a perfect balance of sweetness and acidity, a third with unusual spice notes unlike anything in commercial production. Victoria visited regularly, clearly delighted by the unexpected historical discoveries and the accelerating restoration timeline. During one such visit, as they walked the perimeter of the newly cleared North Orchard, she made a suggestion that would alter the trajectory of Abigail's business plan. "What if," Victoria proposed, "instead of waiting years to develop the cidery as originally planned, we expedite it? These rediscovered Bedford varieties provide a unique marketing angle we hadn't anticipated. Rather than positioning you as yet another heritage apple producer, you become the exclusive source of resurrection varieties presumed lost for nearly a century." Abigail considered the idea, mentally recalculating timelines and budgets. The small barn would need significant work to convert to a cidery. We weren't planning to tackle that until year 2 or 3. The trust could advance additional funds for that specific purpose, Victoria offered. An opportunity this unique justifies accelerating certain aspects of the plan. That evening, after the children were asleep, Abigail sat at the kitchen table with Thomas Bedford's journal, which she had been carefully reading each night, his detailed observations of daily farm life, interspersed with philosophical reflections on stewardship and legacy, had become something of a guidebook not for agricultural techniques, which had evolved considerably since his time, but for the mindset required to approach farming as more than just a business. One entry in particular had resonated with her. April 18, 1898, faced significant crop damage from last night's unexpected frost. Stevens down the road lost everything in talks of selling. I understand his despair but cannot share his surrender. When one chooses to work with the land rather than simply on it, one must accept both abundance and adversity as part of the same covenant. It is not merely that we endure hardship, but how we respond to it that determines whether we merely occupy land or truly cultivate it. As Abigail considered Victoria's proposal to accelerate the cidery development, she found herself applying Thomas's philosophy. The discovery of his experimental apple varieties wasn't merely good fortune. It was an opportunity that carried responsibility to preserve and share something unique that might otherwise have been lost forever. The decision crystallized they would indeed fast-track the cidery development. The Bedford Resurrection series of heritage ciders would become their flagship product, telling the story not just of apples but of persistence, rediscovery, and renewal. By early November, the small barn's renovation was underway, with local contractors working to transform the sturdy old structure into a small batch cidery while preserving its historical character. Dr. Winters and her team had successfully taken dozens of grafts from the unique varieties, ensuring their genetic preservation regardless of what happened to the ancient trees themselves. The first proper harvest would still be years away, but with careful management and grafting onto established rootstock, they might see limited production within 18 months. Abigail immersed herself in learning cider production, attending workshops and consulting with established craft cideries. Jason, displaying an unexpected talent for graphic design, began developing label concepts for their future products, incorporating elements of Thomas Bedford's original farm designs. Even Emily contributed, carefully pressing flowers and leaves from the farm to create illustrated cards telling the Meadowbrook story, which would eventually accompany each bottle of cider sold. People aren't just buying a drink, she explained with precocious insight. They're buying our story. As Thanksgiving approached their first major holiday at Meadowbrook, Abigail realized how dramatically their lives had changed in just a few months. The small cottage, initially Spartan and unfamiliar, had become undeniably home. School mornings were no longer the rushed urban scramble they had once been, but now involved collecting eggs from their small flock of chickens and walking the orchard's perimeter before the bus arrived. Jason had joined the high school's Future Farmers of America chapter and was thriving in ways she hadn't seen since before Michael's death. Emily had made new friends and spent hours outdoors, developing a detailed map of the property's wildlife habitats. Abigail herself had transformed as well. The constant low-grade anxiety that had been her companion for years, worry about bills, job security, providing opportunities for her children hadn't disappeared, but had changed in character. The challenges she faced now were tangible, addressable, and purposeful. She worked harder than she ever had at the diner, often collapsing into bed exhausted, but it was the satisfying exhaustion of creation rather than the hollow fatigue of merely surviving. Their Thanksgiving table reflected this transformation. Rosie and several other friends from town joined them in the cottage, which was crowded but warm with conversation and laughter. The meal featured vegetables from their own kitchen garden, eggs from their chickens, and apple pie made with fruit from the orchard's surviving standard varieties. "A toast," Rosie proposed, raising her glass. "To Abigail and her vision for Meadowbrook. And to Thomas Bedford," Walter added, "who planted trees for a future he would never see. And to Sterling Development losing their bid," Jason said with teenage bluntness, earning laughter and emphatic agreement from the adults. As the evening progressed and dishes were cleared, Victoria, who had initially declined the invitation but ultimately relented, drew Abigail aside. "I have something to show you," she said, retrieving a folder from her bag. "The preliminary marketing study for Bedford Resurrection Cider. I had a consultant analyze the potential market. Abigail opened the folder and found herself looking at projections that exceeded her most optimistic estimates. This can't be right, she said, scanning the numbers again. These revenue projections for year 3 are entirely plausible. Victoria completed the thought. The combination of authentic historical provenance, unique flavor profiles, and the compelling rediscovery narrative creates what marketers call a premium positioning opportunity. In simple terms, restaurants and specialty retailers will pay a significant premium for a product with this story and exclusivity. This would change everything, Abigail said, still processing the implications. At these numbers, we could accelerate the main house restoration, expand production more quickly, maybe even add an on-site tasting room earlier than planned. Victoria nodded. The potential is certainly there, but I would caution against expanding too rapidly. Quality and authenticity are your unique advantages scaled too quickly, and you risk undermining both. Their conversation was interrupted by Emily calling everyone to the living room, where she had organized an impromptu Thanksgiving talent show. As Abigail watched her children and their new community sharing music, stories, and laughter, she felt a profound sense of gratitude for the unexpected path that had led them here. Later that night, after the guests had departed and the children were asleep, Abigail bundled up and walked to the main farmhouse. She'd been spending several hours each week carefully sorting through the contents of Thomas Bedford's safe, cataloging items and researching their significance. The process had created an unexpected connection to the man whose vision had established this place nearly 140 years earlier, in the quiet of the old house, illuminated only by battery-powered lanterns until electricity could be restored. Abigail opened Thomas's journal to an entry she had discovered earlier that week. November 28, 1889, Thanksgiving. Reflected today on the curious nature of gratitude, how it expands to fill whatever vessel holds it. This farm was raw potential when we arrived. Much work yet before us. Now, 3 years hence, we have a home, bearing orchards. And though challenges remain aplenty, I find myself thankful not despite the work ahead, but because of it. To build something enduring requires effort worthy of that endurance. The words seemed to span the century between them, a hand reaching back through time with wisdom that felt freshly relevant. Abigail ran her fingers over the faded ink, feeling a kinship with this man she would never meet, but whose legacy she was now continuing. The sound of gravel crunching outside pulled her from these reflections. Through the dusty window, she could see headlights approaching, unusual for nearly 10:00 p.m. on Thanksgiving, as the vehicle came closer. She recognized Alexander Chen's car from Sterling Development, wary but curious. Abigail stepped onto the porch as Chen parked and emerged with a portfolio under his arm. His expression was difficult to read in the dim light, not quite hostile, but certainly not friendly. "Ms. Reynolds," he called in greeting. "I apologize for the late hour and the holiday intrusion, but I've been trying to reach you for days." "Mr. Chen," Abigail acknowledged coolly. "What brings Sterling to Meadowbrook on Thanksgiving night?" Chen approached the porch but remained at the bottom of the steps, perhaps sensing that he was not welcome to come closer. "Business, Miss Mana Reynolds. Specifically, a proposal I'm authorized to present directly to you, bypassing the Heritage Trust entirely." "I'm not interested in selling. Mr. Chen, I thought that was clear." "You misunderstand," Chen replied, his tone shifting to something more conciliatory. "We are not looking to acquire the property outright anymore. We're offering a development partnership." He extended the portfolio. "Our research indicates that your heritage apple varieties could have significant market value. Sterling is prepared to invest $3 million to develop a commercial-scale cidery operation here. Along with a boutique hospitality venue, you would retain ownership of the intellectual property and receive substantial royalties." Abigail didn't take the portfolio. And what would happen to the rest of the farm? The historical buildings. The restoration plan. Chen hesitated briefly. The development would require utilizing approximately 80% of the acreage for more economically productive purposes. The main house could be preserved as the centerpiece of a country club facility. The original orchard section would become a themed attraction within a larger residential community. So essentially, you want to turn Thomas Bedford's agricultural legacy into a decorative element for a luxury development, Abigail summarized, not bothering to keep the disapproval from her voice. Commercialize the apple varieties while bulldozing most of what he built. I'm offering you financial security, Miss Reynolds, Chen said, a hint of frustration breaking through his professional demeanor. The Heritage Trust's approach may be idealistic, but it's economically marginal at best. Our proposal provides guaranteed returns without the years of uncertainty and labor ahead of you. For a moment, Abigail allowed herself to imagine the path Chen was offering: immediate financial stability, professional development of the business, none of the backbreaking work and anxiety that came with building something from the ground up. It was tempting in its simplicity, its certainty. Then her eyes drifted to the worn leather journal in her hands, and Thomas Bedford's words echoed in her mind. To build something enduring requires effort worthy of that endurance. Thank you for the offer, Mr. Chen, she said finally, but I'm not interested. Meadowbrook isn't just land and buildings to be repurposed for maximum profit. It's a heritage that deserves to be honored, not commodified. Chen's jaw tightened. Miss Reynolds, you're making a significant financial mistake. Our projections aren't the only measure of value. Mr. Chen, Abigail interrupted. You see this place as an asset. I see it as a responsibility and an opportunity to build something meaningful. We have fundamentally different visions, and mine isn't for sale. Chen studied her for a long moment before nodding curtly. As you wish, but should you reconsider? Our offer remains open until the end of the year. He returned to his car without another word, the portfolio still under his arm. As the headlights disappeared down the drive, Abigail remained on the porch, Thomas's journal clutched to her chest. The encounter with Chen had clarified something important. Her commitment to Meadowbrook wasn't just about business opportunity or even providing for her family. It had become about honoring a legacy, about stewardship in its deepest sense. She looked out over the darkened farm, imagining Thomas Bedford standing in this same spot a century earlier, perhaps also pondering the future of the land he had cultivated. Their circumstances were different, separated by time and experience, but they shared a vision of this place that transcended mere ownership or profit. Tomorrow would bring more work, endless work, but tonight, in the quiet aftermath of Thanksgiving, Abigail felt a profound certainty that they were on the right path. The hidden safe hadn't contained gold or jewels, but something far more valuable, a connection to the past that illuminated the way forward. Spring arrived at Meadowbrook Farm with an explosive energy that transformed the landscape almost overnight. The apple trees in the main orchard, properly pruned during winter for the first time in years, erupted in a magnificent display of blossoms that surpassed Abigail's most optimistic expectations. The North Orchard, home to Thomas Bedford's experimental varieties, showed promising signs of revival after careful restoration work. Standing amid the sea of white and pink blossoms, Abigail took a rare moment to simply breathe and appreciate how far they had come since that fateful auction day 6 months earlier. The farm was still very much a work in progress, with the main house renovation only partially complete, but signs of renewal were everywhere. The small barn had been successfully converted into a cidery, with gleaming stainless steel tanks now sharing space with the original wooden beams. Dr. Winters' team had successfully propagated dozens of trees from Thomas's unique varieties, creating a nursery of saplings that would eventually expand production. The cottage garden was now orderly rows of vegetables and herbs rather than the tangle of weeds it had been. Thinking deep thoughts, Victoria asked, approaching through the orchard with a tablet in hand. Her visits had become weekly occurrences as the project gained momentum. Just appreciating the blossoms, Abigail replied. Abigail, I knew intellectually that the orchard would bloom, but seeing it like this, she gestured to the canopy of flowers stretching across the hillside. It's more beautiful than I imagined. Victoria nodded, understanding the sentiment. Beauty and functionality and perfect harmony, that's what makes orchards special. She held up her tablet. Speaking of functionality, I have some news you'll want to see. The DNA analysis of Thomas's apple varieties has been completed. Abigail took the tablet, scrolling through the scientific report with growing excitement. So they're definitively unique, not matches to any known varieties. Completely unique, Victoria confirmed. Furthermore, two of them show genetic markers associated with disease resistance that are particularly valuable for modern breeding programs. The university is already fielding inquiries from commercial nurseries interested in licensing rights. Licensing, Abigail looked up from the report. I hadn't even considered that possibility. You own the trees and their genetics, Victoria pointed out. If commercial nurseries want to propagate these varieties for widespread distribution, they need your permission. That represents a potential revenue stream independent of your cider production. The implications were significant, while the Bedford Resurrection cider brand remained their primary focus. Licensing the genetics of Thomas's apples to nurseries could provide immediate income, while the orchard continued its slow journey back to full production. There's more, Victoria continued as they walked toward the cidery. The Historical Society completed their assessment of Thomas's papers. They're quite excited about his detailed records of agricultural practices from the late 19th century. They're proposing a small exhibit at the County Museum, which would include promoting Meadowbrook as a living agricultural heritage site. Abigail smiled at the thought of Thomas Bedford receiving recognition after all these years. His meticulous records had proved invaluable, not just for their restoration efforts, but apparently for historical research as well. As they approached the cidery, the sound of hammering greeted them. The construction crew was completing work on what would become a small tasting room. In addition to their business plan made possible by the accelerated timeline Victoria had proposed after the discovery of Thomas's apple varieties. Inside, Walter was supervising the delivery of their first proper cider press, a refurbished model that struck the right balance between authenticity and efficiency. Jason, who had developed a passionate interest in the cider-making process, was helping position the equipment, looking more confident and engaged than Abigail could remember since before his father's death. The first test batch is scheduled for next week, Walter informed them proudly, using conventional apples. Of course, the heritage crop won't be ready for months, but it will let us calibrate the equipment and begin developing our processes. As Abigail inspected the new setup, her phone chimed with a message. It was from Rosie at the diner, and its brevity conveyed urgency. Sterling presenting to County Commission right now. You should be here. Abigail showed the message to Victoria, whose expression immediately darkened. We should go, the older woman said. Chen has been suspiciously quiet since his Thanksgiving visit. They arrived at the county courthouse 15 minutes later to find the commission meeting room packed with residents. Alexander Chen stood at the podium, projecting sleek architectural renderings of a development called Meadow Vista Estates, a name clearly chosen to evoke the farm without directly appropriating it. Phase 1 includes 46 luxury homes on generous lots, preserving much of the natural landscape. Chen was explaining as they slipped into seats at the back. Phase 2 would add the country club, golf course, and boutique hotel, creating approximately 120 full-time jobs for county residents. Commissioner Walker, a fourth-generation farmer himself, looked skeptical. And this development would be located where? Exactly. These renderings show terrain very similar to the northeast quadrant of the county. Chen nodded smoothly. We've secured options on 6 properties in that area, totaling approximately 800 acres. We're in final negotiations for 2 additional properties that would complete the footprint we need. Abigail leaned toward Victoria. That's all around Meadowbrook, she whispered. They're trying to surround us. Victoria nodded grimly. Classic encirclement strategy. They can't get your property, so they're attempting to control everything around it. What about water rights? Commissioner Johnson asked. Development of that scale would significantly impact the watershed that feeds several existing farms. Our environmental impact study addresses those concerns, Chen replied, indicating a thick document on the commissioner's table. We're proposing a state-of-the-art water reclamation system that would actually improve watershed health compared to current agricultural usage. From where Abigail sat, She could see several neighboring farmers exchanging concerned glances. Water in Clearwater County was a perpetually sensitive issue, with farms that had operated for generations holding historic rights that newer developments often challenged. As Chen continued his presentation, outlining tax benefits and infrastructure improvements, Victoria scribbled calculations on a notepad. "They're moving faster than I anticipated," she murmured. "They must have been working on this plan since they lost the bid for your property." And when the public comment period opened, Victoria was the first to approach the podium. The transformation from her usually reserved demeanor to commanding public speaker was remarkable. "Commissioners, I'm Victoria Hargrove of the Heritage Farm Preservation Trust," she began. "While Sterling's presentation is certainly polished, I urge you to look beyond the attractive renderings to the actual impact this development would have on Clearwater County's agricultural heritage and water ecosystem." She proceeded to systematically challenge key points of Chen's presentation, citing specific county ordinances, historical water rights precedents, and environmental protection statutes that the development would potentially violate. Her command of both legal details and local history clearly impressed the commissioners. Furthermore, she continued, the proposed development would effectively isolate Meadowbrook Farm, a property currently undergoing historical restoration as an agricultural heritage site. This appears to be a deliberate strategy to pressure the farm into eventually selling by surrounding it with incompatible land uses. Chen immediately requested an opportunity to respond, his professional composure showing cracks for the first time. "Ms. Hargrove's characterization is both inaccurate and unfair. Sterling has designed Meadow Vista Estates specifically to complement the rural character of the region, including preserving agricultural viewsheds. By replacing working farms with decorative landscaping," Victoria countered. "That's not preservation, it's appropriation of rural aesthetic without rural function." The debate continued for another hour, with several local farmers and business owners offering comments both for and against the development. The economic benefits Chen promised were appealing to many, particularly those struggling with the county's limited job opportunities. Yet concerns about water rights, traffic, and the fundamental character of the community resonated deeply with others. When Abigail finally approached the podium, she felt a moment of panic. Public speaking had never been her strength, and following Victoria's articulate presentation seemed particularly daunting. But as she looked out at the crowd, she saw many familiar faces, people who had helped clear the orchard, who had offered advice and encouragement, who had believed in Meadowbrook's potential when it was still more dream than reality. "My name is Abigail Reynolds," she began, her voice steadier than she'd expected. "6 months ago, I was a waitress with no connection to farming beyond childhood memories of my grandfather's orchard. Today, I'm the caretaker of Meadowbrook Farm, a property that has taught me more about community, perseverance, and meaningful work than I ever imagined possible." She described discovering Thomas Bedford's safe, the unique apple varieties that had survived against all odds, and the emerging business that would preserve this agricultural heritage while creating sustainable economic value. "What I've learned from Thomas Bedford's journal and from working this land is that true stewardship means balancing present needs with future responsibilities. The development Mr. Chen proposes offers quick economic benefits, but at what long-term cost to our water resources, agricultural capacity, and community identity?" Looking directly at the commissioners, she concluded, "I'm not opposed to progress or change, but I believe progress should build upon our strengths rather than replacing them. Clearwater County's strength has always been its agricultural heritage, and the people who maintain it. I ask you to consider whether Meadow Vista Estates would enhance that heritage or simply consume it." The commission ultimately took no action that day, scheduling further hearings and requesting additional environmental impact studies before making any zoning decisions. As the crowd dispersed, Abigail found herself surrounded by neighbors offering thanks for her comments and updates on their own small farms. "You did well in there," Victoria said as they walked back to the car. Speaking from authentic experience is powerful. The commissioners were listening. "But will it make a difference?" Abigail asked. "Sterling has resources, professional lobbyists, fancy presentations. We have what passion and history Don't underestimate those, Victoria replied. And don't underestimate what you've already built at Meadowbrook. Chen dismisses it as economically marginal. But he's wrong. What's emerging there is precisely the kind of sustainable, heritage-based business that represents rural America's future. The following weeks brought a whirlwind of activity. The first test batch of cider, made with conventional apples while waiting for their heritage crop, proved surprisingly successful, with Walter's expertise and Jason's enthusiasm combining to create a product that exceeded Abigail's expectations. Local restaurants expressed immediate interest, and Rosie offered to feature it exclusively at the diner. Meanwhile, the controversy over Sterling's proposed development intensified. County commission meetings became standing room-only affairs as residents debated the community's future. The local newspaper devoted front-page coverage to the issue, including a feature on Meadowbrook's restoration that highlighted the discovery of Thomas's unique apple varieties. Public opinion seemed increasingly divided between those who saw Sterling offering much-needed economic development and those concerned about preserving the county's agricultural character. The commission, clearly feeling pressure from both sides, delayed their decision repeatedly while requesting more information. On a warm May morning, as Abigail sorted apples for their second test batch of cider, Rosie arrived at the farm with news. Chen's been meeting privately with farmers all around you, she reported, offering prices well above market value for their land. 3 have already sold options. From what I hear, Abigail leaned against the sorting table, processing this information. He's not giving up, is he? Not his style, Rosie replied. Word is, Sterling has invested too much in the planning to back out now. They'll keep pressing until they get their development approved. Later that day, as if to confirm Rosie's intelligence, Alexander Chen himself appeared at the cottage door. His demeanor was all business, but Abigail detected an underlying tension in his carefully controlled expression. Miss Reynolds, he began without preamble. I'll be direct. The situation has evolved since our last conversation. Sterling has secured options on approximately 700 acres surrounding Meadowbrook. Our development will proceed with or without the county's immediate approval. Then why are you here? Abigail asked, not inviting him inside. Because your property remains the centerpiece of our ideal plan. He produced a document from his portfolio. This is our final offer, $2.5 million for Meadowbrook Farm, with guarantees that the main house will be preserved as a historical building and the original North Orchard maintained as a heritage garden. You would retain rights to Thomas Bedford's apple varieties and could continue production off-site. The figure was staggering, far more than the property could possibly be worth by conventional valuation. For a brief moment, Abigail allowed herself to consider what such a sum would mean for her family's future college fund secured. Financial stability guaranteed. The endless work and uncertainty of building a business from scratch replaced by immediate security. Why so much? She asked, genuinely curious. The property isn't worth anywhere near that amount. Its strategic value to our development plan exceeds its intrinsic value, Chen admitted. Additionally, the publicity surrounding your restoration project and the discovery of those heritage apples has created complications for our approval process. Acquiring the property resolves those issues. Abigail studied Chen's face, understanding now that the offer wasn't just about acquiring land, it was about acquiring a story. Sterling wanted to incorporate Meadowbrook's narrative of agricultural heritage and historical discovery into their development marketing, neutralizing opposition by appearing to preserve what many residents now saw as a community asset. I need to think about this, she said finally, and discuss it with my family. Chen nodded, clearly having expected this response. Of course, but I should note that the offer expires in 72 hours. Sterling's board meets next week to finalize Phase 1 planning, with or without Meadowbrook included. After he departed, Abigail sat alone at the kitchen table, the offer document before her, its figures seeming to grow larger the longer she stared at them. $2.5 million, security, certainty, an end to the constant worry about whether their fledgling business would succeed, whether the restoration costs would exceed projections, whether the heritage apples would perform as hoped in commercial production. When Jason and Emily returned from school, she shared Chen's offer, watching their reactions carefully. To her surprise, both children immediately rejected the idea. "But we've just started," Emily protested. "The trees are blooming, and my garden is growing. And we were going to open the tasting room next month." "And what about Thomas's apples?" Jason added. "Chen says they'd preserve the North Orchard as a heritage garden, but that's just for show. They wouldn't actually continue his work or honor what he was trying to do." Their immediate commitment to the farm touched Abigail deeply. In just 6 months, this place had become more than property to them. It had become home, purpose, identity. She realized with sudden clarity that it had done the same for her. What had begun as a desperate gamble for affordable housing had evolved into a calling that engaged her mind, body, and spirit in ways her previous life never had. That evening, she called Victoria to discuss the offer and was surprised to find the older woman didn't immediately dismiss it. "It's a very significant sum," Victoria acknowledged, "and while my trust would be disappointed to lose Meadowbrook as a preservation project, our agreement gives you the right to sell if you choose. I wouldn't fault you for accepting, especially given the children's future needs." "But you wouldn't take it, would you?" Abigail asked, sensing the unspoken thought. Victoria was quiet for a moment. "No," she finally said, "but my circumstances are very different from yours. I have financial security that allows me certain choices. You need to make this decision based on what's best for your family." After the call, Abigail found herself drawn to the main farmhouse, where restoration work on the first floor was nearing completion. The parlor where they had discovered Thomas's hidden safe had been carefully renovated, preserving original details while making the space functional for modern use. They planned to open it to visitors as part of tours that would eventually include the cidery and orchard. In this room, a century earlier, Thomas Bedford had made countless decisions that shaped the farm's destiny. Had he ever faced a crossroads like this? Had he ever been tempted to take the easier, more certain path? Abigail opened his journal to an entry she had marked weeks earlier. June 12, 1899. Received an offer today from Western Consolidated Fruit to purchase the entire North Orchard harvest at a guaranteed price regardless of quality. The certainty is tempting after last year's market fluctuations. Yet their requirement that I abandon my experimental grafting in favor of their preferred commercial varieties gives me pause. Security purchased with independence is seldom worth its price. Decline their offer. Will continue on our chosen path, uncertain though it may be. The parallels to her current situation were striking. Thomas had chosen independence and purpose over security and certainty. A century later, Abigail faced essentially the same choice. The next morning, she walked the perimeter of the property alone, trying to see it through fresh eyes, the orchard in full bloom, the newly cleared fields waiting for additional plantings, the small barn transformed into a cidery, the cottage garden bursting with spring vegetables. Everywhere she looked, she saw not just what was, but what could be. The vision gradually taking physical form through daily effort and commitment. Chen's offer promised immediate reward without further struggle, but it also meant surrendering this emerging creation at the very moment it was beginning to reveal its potential. More than that, it meant abandoning the broader vision of what Meadowbrook might represent, not just for her family, but for the community and the county's agricultural future. By the time she completed her circuit of the property, Abigail had made her decision. She texted Chen a simple message. "Thank you for your offer, but Meadowbrook is not for sale at any price." His reply came almost immediately. "You're making a significant mistake. Miss Reynolds, Sterling will proceed with development on all surrounding properties. Your farm will become an island in a sea of construction, with likely impacts on your water access and business viability." The threat was thinly veiled but clear. Sterling intended to move forward aggressively, possibly using their surrounding properties to create problems for Meadowbrook. Yet rather than intimidating her, Chen's message solidified Abigail's resolve. If Meadowbrook was worth surrounding, if it was worth $2, $5 million to Sterling, then it was certainly worth fighting for. That afternoon, she called a meeting at the farm, inviting Victoria, Dr. Winters from the university, Walter, Rosie, and several neighboring farmers who had expressed concern about Sterling's plans. They gathered in the newly renovated parlor of the main house, with additional folding chairs brought in to accommodate everyone. "Thank you all for coming," Abigail began. "As most of you know, Sterling Development has been pursuing an aggressive strategy to create a luxury development surrounding Meadowbrook Farm. Yesterday, they made a final offer to purchase this property, which I declined." Murmurs of approval ran through the group, but Abigail raised her hand. "That decision means Sterling will likely intensify pressure on the county commission for approval of their plan and on neighboring properties to sell. They've made it clear they intend to isolate Meadowbrook if they can't acquire it," Victoria spoke up. "The legal challenges to their water usage plans are substantial, but Sterling has resources to fight prolonged battles. We need a more comprehensive strategy, which is why I've asked you all here," Abigail said. "Individually, each of our farms and businesses is vulnerable. But what if we created something larger, a formal agricultural heritage district that would provide legal protections, marketing advantages, and shared resources?" The concept sparked immediate interest. Over the next 2 hours, the group discussed possibilities ranging from a simple marketing collective to a legally designated agricultural preservation zone that would require special zoning considerations. Dr. Winters offered the university's resources to develop sustainable farming approaches suited to the region's specific conditions. Victoria suggested the trust could provide matching funds for cooperative infrastructure improvements. By evening's end, a framework had emerged. The Clearwater Agricultural Heritage Alliance would unite farms committed to sustainable practices and preservation of historical agricultural approaches. Members would share marketing resources, equipment, and expertise while retaining independent ownership. With proper designation from the county, the cooperative zone would receive special consideration in development decisions affecting water rights, road access, and zoning. "This is more than just defensive," Frank Johnson, a third-generation dairy farmer, observed. "This is actually a better business model for most of us. Shared resources, collective marketing, educational components. These make economic sense regardless of Sterling's plans." As the meeting concluded, Abigail felt a surge of hope more powerful than anything she'd experienced since discovering Thomas's apple varieties. They weren't just fighting against something. They were building something, a vision for rural preservation that honored heritage while embracing innovation and cooperation. The weeks that followed brought intense activity on multiple fronts. The cooperative concept gained momentum as more farmers joined, attracted by both the protective aspects and the economic benefits of collective marketing and resource sharing. Victoria's legal team worked with county officials to develop formal designation criteria for an agricultural heritage zone. Using models from other regions that had successfully balanced preservation with development, Sterling countered by accelerating their timeline and intensifying their marketing campaign, emphasizing job creation and tax benefits while characterizing the cooperative as anti-progress. Community meetings became increasingly contentious, with clear divisions emerging between those who prioritized economic development and those concerned with preserving agricultural heritage. Through it all, work at Meadowbrook continued. The tasting room was completed and opened for limited weekend hours, offering samples of their test batches while educating visitors about the history of the farm and the unique apple varieties being restored. Local media coverage brought unexpected attention, drawing visitors from neighboring counties curious about the lost apple varieties and the hidden safe story. Dr. Winters and her team made a breakthrough in propagating Thomas's most challenging variety, the one showing the strongest disease resistance markers, creating genuine excitement in horticultural circles and leading to the university's first licensing inquiry, which would provide immediate revenue to support the farm's continued restoration. As June arrived, the county commission finally scheduled their decisive hearing on both Sterling's development application and the proposed agricultural heritage zone designation. The meeting was moved to the high school gymnasium to accommodate the anticipated crowd, with local television stations planning to broadcast the proceedings. The night before the hearing, Abigail sat on the porch of the main farmhouse, which was now structurally restored, though interior work continued. The view across the orchard to the rolling hills beyond was spectacular in the evening light. The young fruit now visible on trees that had been neglected for years before their rescue. She was joined by Jason and Emily, both uncharacteristically quiet as they contemplated the next day's hearing. "What happens if we lose?" Emily finally asked, voicing the question that had lingered unspoken between them. Abigail considered her answer carefully. "If the Commission approves Sterling's plan without the Agricultural Heritage Zone protections, we face a more difficult path, but we don't stop. We adapt. We persevere. We find another way forward." "Like Thomas did during the drought of 1894, Jason said, referencing a journal entry they had read together. When he wrote about converting adversity to advantage by developing more drought-resistant grafting techniques. Abigail smiled at her son's perfect recall of Thomas's words. "Exactly, whatever happens tomorrow. Meadowbrook has already achieved something important. It's connected us to this land, to its history, and to each other in ways I never imagined possible when we first saw that auction sign." The gymnasium was filled beyond capacity the following morning, with passionate supporters on both sides carrying signs and wearing buttons declaring their positions. The commissioners sat at a long table on the stage. Looking somewhat overwhelmed by the turnout and the emotional intensity in the room, Alexander Chen presented first, his presentation polished and persuasive as always. The economic benefits he outlined were substantial: hundreds of jobs, millions in tax revenue, infrastructure improvements that would benefit the entire county. He emphasized Sterling's commitment to environmental sustainability and aesthetically pleasing design that would honor the rural character of the region while bringing necessary economic development. When Victoria presented the Agricultural Heritage Zone proposal, she took a different approach, focusing not on opposition to Sterling, but on the positive vision of the cooperative. She detailed how the proposed zone would preserve working farms while encouraging innovation, education, and sustainable practices. Rather than preventing all development, the designation would create guidelines ensuring compatibility with existing agricultural operations. "This isn't about choosing between past and future," she concluded. "It's about building a future that honors and incorporates our agricultural heritage rather than erasing it." Public comment lasted for hours, with impassioned speakers on both sides. Business owners emphasized the need for economic growth. Farmers spoke of multi-generational connections to the land. Younger residents described the challenge of finding local employment, while older ones expressed concern about losing community character. When Abigail's turn came, she brought something none of the others had: a tangible product of Meadowbrook's restoration. Placing a bottle on the commissioner's table, she explained, "This is the first official bottling of Bedford Resurrection cider, made from the historic orchard we've restored. It represents what's possible when we approach development as enhancement rather than replacement." Glancing toward the section where Jason and Emily sat with Rosie and Walter, she added, "When I first came to Clearwater County, I was a single mother with few prospects beyond waiting tables. Meadowbrook Farm gave my family not just a home, but a purpose and a future. I believe the Agricultural Heritage Zone can do the same for our entire community, honor our past while opening doors to new possibilities that remain true to who we are." The commissioners ultimately voted 3-2 to approve the Agricultural Heritage Zone designation, with modified boundaries that still allowed for a scaled-down version of Sterling's development in less agriculturally significant areas. It was a compromise that left neither side completely satisfied, but that most community members viewed as a reasonable balance. For Meadowbrook, the decision meant protection of their water rights, limitations on incompatible adjacent development, and formal recognition as an agricultural heritage site that would enhance their marketing position. For the newly formed cooperative, it provided a foundation for collective action that would strengthen all participating farms. 1 month later, as summer reached its peak, Meadowbrook Farm hosted the official launch of their first commercial cider release. The event doubled as a celebration of the cooperative's formation and a thank you to the community members who had supported their efforts. The restored farmhouse and grounds welcomed over 300 visitors throughout the day. Tours of the orchard, demonstrations of traditional cider pressing techniques, and tastings of both conventional and heritage variety ciders created an atmosphere of celebration and accomplishment. Victoria, observing the activity from the shade of an ancient oak tree, smiled as Abigail joined her. "You've created something remarkable here in just 9 months," she said. "Thomas Bedford would be proud." "We've created it," Abigail corrected her. "Without your trust, none of this would have been possible." Victoria shook her head. "The trust provided opportunity, but you provided vision and determination. There's a difference between restoring buildings and revitalizing a heritage. You've done both." As the celebration continued into evening, with string lights illuminating the orchard and local musicians playing on the farmhouse porch, Abigail found a quiet moment to visit the parlor where they had discovered Thomas's safe. The restored room now featured a display of items from the safe, the journal, ledgers, and period photographs. Along with the story of their discovery, she opened the journal to its final entry. Written in 1924 when Thomas was in his 70s, August 17, 1924, place this journal and other papers in the vault today, a record of our stewardship for whoever might follow. Orchards, like all worthwhile endeavors, require faith in a future beyond our own horizon. We plant trees whose full maturity we may never witness. Graft varieties whose peak production will come after our hands can no longer harvest them. This is not folly, but wisdom to contribute to a story longer than our own chapter, to nurture something that will outlast us. Meadowbrook has been my life's work, not because I shaped it, but because it shaped me. May whoever finds these words understand that the true harvest of this place is not measured only in bushels or barrels, but in the cultivation of both land and character. As Abigail closed the journal, she gazed out the window at her children among the celebration crowd, Jason confidently explaining cider production to visitors, Emily proudly leading tours of her expanding herb garden. Beyond them, cooperative members discussed plans for shared equipment purchases and marketing initiatives. University researchers collected data from the experimental orchard sections. The hidden safe had indeed changed everything, though not in the way treasure stories usually unfold. Its contents knowledge, history, connection to the past had proved more valuable than gold or jewels could have been. Thomas Bedford's vision, preserved in that safe for nearly a century, had catalyzed not just the rebirth of one farm, but potentially a new model for rural preservation across the county. As the summer sun began to set, casting long shadows across the orchard, Dr. Winters approached Abigail with an excited expression. "I've been meaning to tell you all day," she said, "but it's been so busy. We've completed the genetic sequencing of Thomas's fifth variety, the one with the spice notes, and it's even more remarkable than we thought. The disease resistance profile is unlike anything in our database. This could be revolutionary for organic apple cultivation." Abigail smiled, appreciating the way science was validating what Thomas had achieved through intuition and patient observation. He was ahead of his time in so many ways. "There's more," Dr. Winters continued. "Remember how Thomas's letter mentioned that the true wealth of Meadowbrook was in the North Orchard well? We've been carefully excavating around those oldest trees, documenting the root systems and soil composition, and we found something unusual, a series of clay containers buried between the rows." "Buried containers?" Abigail asked, intrigued. "What was in them?" "Seeds." Dr. Winters replied, her eyes bright with academic excitement. "Hundreds of different seeds, carefully preserved in sealed clay pots, each one labeled with a location and date. We've only opened 2 so far, but they contain seeds from all over the world of varieties that might have been lost otherwise. It appears Thomas Bedford was creating what we would now call a seed bank, preserving genetic diversity at a time when most farmers were narrowing their focus to a few commercial varieties." Abigail felt a wave of emotion. Even after months of reading his journals and working his land, Thomas Bedford was still revealing himself, still teaching, still preserving something precious for a future he would never see. "We believe this may be one of the oldest intentional seed preservation collections in the country," Dr. Winters continued. "The university would like to partner with Meadowbrook to document, propagate, and potentially reintroduce some of these varieties. It would be a major contribution to agricultural biodiversity." As the news spread through the celebration, visitors gathered around the North Orchard, where researchers had set up a small display of the clay containers and their contents. Emily, always quick to grasp the significance of things, explained to a group of children how the seeds were like messages from the past and how Thomas had believed in protecting different kinds of plants, so people in the future would have choices. Later that evening, as the crowd thinned and the musicians packed their instruments, Alexander Chen made an unexpected appearance. He stood at the edge of the property for a long moment, observing the scene, before approaching Abigail where she sat on the farmhouse steps. "Congratulations on your cider launch, Miss Reynolds," he said, his tone professional but without the edge it had carried in previous encounters. "And on the Heritage Zone designation." "Thank you," Abigail replied, surprised by his presence. "I wouldn't have expected to see you here." Chen glanced around at the farm, taking in the restored buildings, the thriving orchard, the sense of community that permeated the place. "I make a point of understanding successful ventures, even when they don't align with my company's approach." He paused. "The seed bank discovery is significant. My board has asked me to convey that Sterling has no intention of interfering with the agricultural heritage zone. In fact, we're adjusting our development plans to create more substantive buffers and potentially some collaborative elements." Abigail studied him, trying to gauge his sincerity. "What changed?" "Market research," Chen answered with unexpected candor. "Our potential buyers are actually quite attracted to the idea of living near a working agricultural heritage district, particularly one with historical significance and innovative practices. They're less interested in a golf course than we anticipated and more interested in farm-to-table amenities, educational opportunities, and authentic rural experiences." He offered her a business card. "When you're ready to discuss how Meadowbrook might supply our farm-to-table restaurant or participate in our agritourism initiatives, I'd appreciate a call. Sometimes opposing visions can find unexpected common ground." With that, he nodded politely and departed, leaving Abigail to consider the irony. The very qualities that had made Meadowbrook worth fighting to preserve were now being recognized as economic assets by the developer who had tried to replace them. As darkness fell, the remaining guests departed, leaving just the family and closest friends. They gathered on the farmhouse porch, passing a bottle of Bedford Resurrection cider as they reflected on the remarkable journey of the past 9 months. "I've been thinking about names," Jason said suddenly. "Names for what?" Abigail asked. "For the seed bank project. If it's going to be a formal partnership with the university, it should have a proper name." He looked at his mother. "I was thinking the Bedford Reynolds Biodiversity Collection." Abigail felt a swell of pride in her son's thoughtfulness. "That's perfect, Jason. And I have something to show you," Emily added, reaching into her pocket and producing a small, smooth stone, the same lucky charm she had clutched so tightly during the auction. "I'm going to bury this by Thomas's special apple trees, for good luck for another 100 years." As Emily darted off to complete her mission, Walter chuckled. "That girl understands stewardship instinctively." "They both do," Abigail agreed, watching as Jason joined his sister, flashlight in hand to illuminate her task. Victoria, who had remained largely silent during the evening's wind down, finally spoke. "When I outbid Sterling at that auction, I believed I was saving a farm. I didn't realize I was helping to launch a movement." Rosie raised her glass. "To Meadowbrook past, present, and future. And to hidden safes that hold more than gold," Walter added, as the toast concluded. Abigail's gaze drifted to the North Orchard, where her children's flashlight beams danced among the ancient trees in the darkness. She could almost imagine Thomas Bedford standing there, nodding in approval at what his farm had become, not a museum piece frozen in time, but a living, evolving testament to the enduring value of agricultural heritage and innovation. The hidden safe had indeed changed everything, not by providing instant wealth, but by revealing a different kind of treasure, a legacy of stewardship, a vision of sustainability, and the unbreakable connection between past and future that lies at the heart of true cultivation in the years to come. Meadowbrook Farm would face new challenges and opportunities, The Bedford Resurrection cider would win awards and build a national reputation. The seed bank would yield forgotten varieties with remarkable qualities. The agricultural heritage zone would become a model studied and replicated by communities across the country. But on this summer night, as Abigail Reynolds sat on the porch of a farmhouse that had witnessed generations of struggle and triumph, what mattered most was simpler, the knowledge that she and her children had found not just a home, but a purpose. Not just a business, but a calling. Not just a property, but a place in a story much larger than themselves. And somewhere, perhaps, Thomas Bedford was smiling at how his carefully preserved legacy had found exactly the stewards he had hoped for when he sealed his life's work in a hidden safe and entrusted it to the future.